On this week's episode, we discuss exactly what you are wanting to look at when you're trying to pick out beef for steaks or any sort of meal that you have in mind. We have all the answers for some of those things, such as USDA grades and what you're looking for in finish types. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. With me is my co-host and father, Brandon. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm winging this, so I hope you enjoy what we have to offer today. My dad already came up with some ideas for us to discuss, which I put in no absolute format whatsoever. It's just scribbled on a pad. So we'll kick it off with, do you know what you want with your steaks when you are looking for beef? Recently, we're in January now, but recently we had Christmas and New Year's. And when you go and look at beef, anything in beef, I'm sure pork's the same way to an extent, but right now we're focused on beef. So you see that, and there are high prices on beef, and Dad can kind of explain some of that for the things that they were having for Christmas this year. But what we wanted to start off with was, what are you looking for when you want to get yourself a steak for that nice dinner, or even a regular night in to cook for yourself? So really, this is kind of a how-to maybe, or a guide to what exactly to look for. We'll go over some of the things like, where are the different steaks and types of steaks located on the animal, so you can find out exactly what part of the animal you're consuming. Some of those USDA grades, so what is the difference between choice and prime and select. And then, of course, some of the vocabulary that people might throw out there when you're talking to them, in terms of things like live weight and rail weight, and we'll explain all of that. And then, of course, with all of that, it comes down to, what's the process? How does it go? Now, we have discussed a lot of this beforehand. However, this is a little different. We're going to kind of walk you through exactly how to get what you want. And simultaneously, this is promoting what we have been trying to tell a lot of people recently, which is go get beef producers and do direct beef consumer sales. Doing that is going to be well worth it. You'll get exactly what you want. You know what you're getting, and you can just set up that relationship with the local producer, so that you don't have to worry about paying 500% more than what it really costs. Puts a little more money in the producer's pocket, saves a little bit more on your end, and overall, it's a good just a good decision, both financially and health wise. Everybody really rags on red meat, but it's not red meat that's the problem. It's just what you're trying to get out of that red meat. Just know what you're eating, just like any other thing in the world, eating or drinking. Just know what you're consuming. So with that, I will hand it over to Dad for any of his initial comments.
Well, this kind of spurred on this discussion. We've been talking about it. We recently got our butcher beef back, and someone we sold to got their butcher beef back. And I've talked to a number of butchers over the years. And as I was carving up a prime rib roast on Christmas Day, and you got several people standing around saying, "How do you want your meat cooked?" And that in itself, just the prep after is prepared and ready for placement on your plate. Everybody's got a different, I guess, a like or preference of how they want their meat done. Some people want it all gray; they want it really dry, completely done, no pain. So you got your medium well or well done, all the way to, well, I want mine with just a warm center. And so that roast, you can do that with. You can do that with a steak. Just depends on how long you cook it, what heat setting, that kind of stuff. Seared, all kinds of preparatory type things that a good cook can do, and certainly a chef, it's easy for them. But I got to thinking about
the thing I do want to add there too is, we'll make sure that there's a picture showing the difference from rare to well done with steaks. But people also think you have to have a steak well done like you would pork or chicken for salmonella. That's not the case when it comes to beef. It's really the outside. As long as you have that outside seared, where the bacteria is killed on the outside, you're fine. It's the burger, because the burger has been exposed to all sorts of bacteria, and it's got, it looks kind of like worms and stuff, because it's got, the folding layers of meat. But that is what actually needs to be well done. And you do more of a risk by having a rare burger than you ever do with having a rare steak, because that center part's never exposed to the bacteria. It's only the outside.
That's a good point. And part of that is, it looks like worms because it's just been extruded through a grinding plate.
Right.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
But You're exactly right. That grinding absolutely and totally mixes all of the meat, the suet, everything that's there gets mixed together and then pushed through that grinding plate, uh, and cutting wheel, or a little basically it's a knife behind it, so that it's nice and tender. I mean, it's burger, but that is the highest risk. You're absolutely right. You can make any piece of meat risky if you leave it set out on a counter. You know, you can take the very center cut of a prime rib roast, leave it out on the counter, and bacteria will get to it. I mean, that's simple cooking precautions. So, with that said, you're right. Some pieces are a little more risky than others, but the rarity of it has no bearing on the health issues that one could or could not get from other cuts of meat, say or types of meat, I should say. Pork, you're worried about trichinella, trichinosis. Poultry, salmonella is a big one. I mean, you want to have your poultry cooked. You're really flirting with danger there. But the inside of a beef is not the issue. So that's a very good point. But everybody has different preferences of what they want. Some people I know, we've got friends of ours that she will eat nothing but burger, doesn't like steak, and prefers, just very tender type of meat. So, to me, it's like, yeah, you can have all the burger you want. I'll take that steak every day, But when you're choosing, what I thought about is when I was cutting through this prime rib for serving was everybody's got preferences on how they want their meat, but does everybody really understand the type of meat? And I'm going back to, is it grass fed or is it grain fed? Or is it kind of a combination of the two? So maybe we can kind of help people out here, and with the expense of it. My mother-in-law was talking about how she had purchased a 5-pound, or right around just a hair over 5-pound chuck roast, which is not a great cut. I mean, it's flavorful, but not the best piece of meat in the world. And that 5-pound roast was over $35 right now in this case. So chuck roast, a lot of people will take chuck and put it into burger because it's already well marbled. So that kind of chunk of meat and that price is unbelievable.
That's probably a good place to start, is the cost itself. Well, I mean, we'll get more into the explanation of why there are certain costs, but before we talk about where the steaks are located and the types of grades that the USDA has outlined, so that you know exactly what you're getting, the cost is a big thing. And you're saying it's $35 for a chuck roast, which is not really the greatest of the meat selections. But then on top of that, we continue to see things like prime rib, which is a desirable cut on an animal, and it is upwards of $300 for a good size roast. And so the cost continues to increase. And that was something that you had discussed too when we or explained when we were having this discussion beforehand, was the cost may be more expensive overall for purchasing an animal that you have already set up with a producer to butcher and everything. And when you're looking at the cost of like what your burger might be, it might be a $4 or $5 burger, and you're going, wow, that is really expensive for a burger. However, you're also getting a $4 or $5 steak, which if you go to the store, that same steak might be costing closer to $20 or $25. So even though you might overall be paying more for burger, so to speak, you are saving significantly when it comes to steak selections and some of those really prime, desirable cuts. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits to, if you do choose to go direct consumer sales or purchases, that's a great opportunity, because you can see real world when you go to the store, instead of going and picking up that steak on the shelf that's $20, you can look and go, oh, I have this in the freezer, and it only cost me a total of 10 to feed the family. So that there is that. And I think that's something that needs to be kind of addressed and at least recognized.
Yeah, we'll expand on that just in a little bit, but let's talk about first the larger picture of there's so much said lately about grass fed versus grain fed, and that's been done ad nauseum. But we'll just do a quick down and dirty. A grain or a grass-fed animal is something that's not been finished. I mean, it's all fat is coming from the grass that it's grazing on or hay that it's eating, and can be provided. Plus, it can go out in the pasture and just graze. And that's what you think of as a grass-fed, where you don't have any grains that are going into it to create more marbling. Now, the health issues or health factors there, a lot of people prefer having grass-fed beef because there's little to no marbling in it. There's some, there has to be. That's just the nature of it, but it is very, very close to the amount of fat content in the meat that venison has, because it's doing exactly the same thing. It's grazing.
And in case anybody, not to make anybody feel stupid, but in case somebody does not know what venison is, it is wild game. Things such as deer, elk, potentially bison, antelope, those type of animals.
Yeah, you're talking about your larger ungulates, or cloven hoofed type animals like that. Yeah, that's the meat is typically much darker, of almost a ruby red color, very rich, dark color, very little fat in it. You have a lot of surface fat because that's a protective layer under the skin and around the organs, that sort of things. But internal in the meat itself is very, very lean. There's very little fat there. And it has some people can even say they can detect the grass taste in it, a real gamey, and not gamey in a bad way, but just a not buttery. Let's put it that way, because that's the other term. And trying to use standardized terms for everybody to understand. The grain fed is very rich in its buttery taste, or very tender, where the grass fed is not as tender typically, because it doesn't have the fat inside the muscle fiber or between muscle fibers to create that tenderness, where it's not dense and tough. The taste is a big deal. I've known some people wanting grass fed because they heard so much about it, and take a taste and it is not what they thought it was, and do not want that. And it's like, ooh, okay, well, they thought they wanted it because everybody talked about it. And there are some very good health benefits to it. But it isn't necessarily it's not what you would pick up typically in a grocer's showcase, unless it says grass fed, and it really is. It's certified grass fed, which one butcher that I've talked to, I have a lot of respect for him, been in it, and very, very good. Got a very good business. And he said he can tell the minute, they bring a carcass in and start to process it. Somebody who's got a grain-fed animal that's trying to be passed off as grass-fed because somebody wanted grass-fed, they're going to look at it and tell, no, that's not it. So there are those kinds of issues there, which you want to make sure that and that's part of what this is about, is educating people as to what they are actually getting for their money. And they want to make sure that you're getting what you want. Also, typically, and I'm trying to
Well, the other thing too is you're talking about the difference between grass and grain finish. Grass is simply, if anybody is really trying to figure out, well, what exactly is that? It's the last, it can be the last 28 days, which is very, very minimum. That's not recommended at all, or all the way up to 6 months of finishing. And it's a process where the producer takes that animal and they either have them eat, typically it's called cob, which is corn, oats, and barley. And those three grains are fed to those animals in a very specific way so that it fattens the animal up and gets those desired grades from the USDA, which we can cover in just a second here. But they will finish those animals by slowly weaning them off of grass and eating primarily those grains to fatten them up. And again, the minimum is typically 28 days. The maximum is 180 normally. There's a lot of people that float somewhere between the 45 to 90 day or 120 day mark. So you're looking at a month and a half to 4 months realistically. If you're looking at feedlots and bigger producers, you're going to be looking closer to the 4 to 6 month finish process to get those grades that they're looking for. However, the grass finish is where you really don't give any grains to that animal. You might give a little bit. It might be, a scoop here or there every day of maybe some cob or some sort of mixture, but it's not their primary meal whatsoever. They are out there in the pasture, free roaming or grazing in the pasture, either on hay or grass. There are people that do hay, but that's more of they're forced to because of the winter, because they're producing all year long. But most of the time, if they're going to finish an animal on grass, they'll finish that animal on grass in the summertime. And just as the fall hits, that's when they'll butcher.
Yeah, and there's different butcher schedules as well. But yeah, a true grass is no grain at all. But you have these intermediates, like you say, the 28. I know some have done 21 day. But to completely, if you're going to grain finish something, I think the research that's been done is it's very specific. A 57-day cycle of grass and grain finish. You know, you've always got grass available for a grain
Right.
finish animal, or it can be mixed. You know, they'll grind it together. But there has to have some roughage there as well. The total turnover from the yellower fat on a grain or a grass-fed animal has typically just a slightly yellow look to it, to complete conversion to grass-fed or grain finished has white fat, and that's a 57-day process, typically of around 15 to 20 pounds max a day. For 57 days puts you right there at that grading of probably, when you look up on our graphic, a choice marbling. It's not super fat, but it's got fat in it. It's in the middle between select, which has very little fat to it, to choice, and then on to prime. And the prime is where it's got lots of fat, lots of marbling in there, very tender, very tasty. That's where we hear the buttery
Right.
moniker put towards the taste of it. So,
And I think that the one thing that should be also addressed too is you're talking select is closer to that grass finish like we've talked about, and then moving through choice all the way to prime. Prime being on the left hand side of the graphic. It's the you're saying more buttery. It's got a lot more marbling to it. Marbling is the fat that's within the muscle layer itself and around it. It's supposed to be less than 2% of all steaks are considered prime. Now, the other thing too is people immediately equate fat with health related decisions. That's not always true. It can be part of it. It's not always true. What the fat is actually more there for is the flavoring aspect. So that's why people ask for more marbling, because that fat, when it's cooked, it releases more and more flavor within the steak, and that's why it's considered the highest quality, is because it's more so related to flavor than it is the health benefits or disadvantages.
and if you look at those graphics, the prime has much more fat, and that the meat almost looks like it is a kind of pinkish instead of red, because of all of the fat that's mixed inside of it. Most I think of what you're consuming is more of your choice grade, which really for me is more bang for the buck. I still get that flavor. I get the tenderness without the high cost, and so I'm getting still more meat. And select is just that. I mean, that's something that is very lean. Some people want that. Some want even leaner than that, which is your grass fed. But the taste is a major part of that taste, and then how tender it is for people. If you're purchasing an animal for yourself, and you say, "Hey, do you have any grass fed animals? And here's so much about them." Get yourself a piece of grass fed meat to begin with. It's truly grass fed. Now, what is grass? What is the definition of a grass fed animal? And that means that that animal has had 90% of its life has had access to grazing. So just because somebody says, well, this is grass fed, and they're feeding it hay inside of a corral, doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely truly grass fed. By definition, doesn't mean it's going to taste that much different, but you may get a little bit more of your marbling in there, even though it's grass fed, because it's not able to go out and graze and move and burn off some of those calories that would normally go to your marbling that you would find in someone who is eating grass but more confined. So those are some of the some really close nuances to that. But looking at your meat, looking at the color of them is a big deal, and how much marbling is in it. If it's got almost no marbling and it's a really deep dark red, you just about bet that's a grass-fed animal. Look at the fat around the edge. If it doesn't have that bright white fat, but more of a dull yellowish fat, which is nothing wrong. It doesn't mean the fat's bad. It's just a different kind of metabolism that takes place to put that fat on. That's probably grain or grass fed.
Now, I think there's the one other thing that we need to discuss, because we've talked grain versus grass finish, and then the USDA grades that we showed.
Grades.
The other thing too is, if anybody's looking to talk to a producer and do that direct sale that we've promoted so much, and I know a lot more people are getting on board with, there's also two other things that I think everybody needs to understand. There's a thing versus live and rail weight. So live weight and rail weight, the difference between those. And then you've talked about during the butchering process, whether you want those steaks and that meat to be bone in or bone out. So starting with live versus rail weight, live is where it's the animal, it's in the flesh. If we were to butcher me, I am at live weight of 180 pounds. Now, if you were to take me and put on the rail weight, knocking that down to about 60%, right? Is what you said. So take that.
60 to 64% of the rail weight is 60 to 64% of your live weight of what's an animal out there standing on its own, grazing, being happy, and getting fat.
Yep. And that's
on
probably
grass
going to
or grain,
be
doesn't matter.
right now. We've got steers that we sold. I think you had at about 1,000 pounds. I'm looking up real quick. Yeah, there was one that had 1,000 pounds, just over. It was 1,033, and then afterwards, so that was his live weight. His rail weight was 620 pounds. So it's about 60% of what the live weight is. So you're losing all the entrails, the fluids, all that stuff that's within the body has been removed, and now you're about 60%. And keep in mind, that's still with bones. now you got the butchering process.
Now you can buy an animal live weight. Some people do that. You have to literally run it that animal and put them on a scale, weigh them to get an accurate weight to them. I can change an animal's weight by holding them off feed and water for a little bit, then putting them on feed and water, and they'll gorge themselves and they'll fill up with water. And now you're manipulating it. You're manipulating. I don't think anybody's doing that. I mean, why would you? It takes too much time and too much effort to do that. And really more of a standard way to do that is your rail weight. Buy them carcass weight or rail weight is the same thing. And it's that is your live weight, 60 to 64%. And I always like to figure 60 because I want to figure a worst case scenario. Some bone structure is different. You look at some animals, their heads are larger. They got a pot belly. They got larger entrails. So you're on a rail weight or carcass weight. The animal's been harvested, and its head is gone, its hide is gone. Which, trust me, a beef hide is heavy. It's all of the entrails are gone. The lower legs are gone. That's all weight. That is waste, and it's not waste because that does get utilized for different types of industries. But still, you're not consuming that. Right. So why pay for that? So the more of the standard way to do that is based on your rail weight or called carcass weight. You still got bone there. You're right. It's just the carcass, or typically they cut your animal in half, and they process it by 2 halves. So still a full beef, or you can buy them by a half a beef, or you may be able to buy a quarter beef. People sometimes go together and they'll purchase a single animal, or 3 people, and they'll divide it however they want to divide it. That's fine. So your rail weight, let's figure for ease of calculating in our noggins, using 1,000-pound animal, which is somewhat light. It's not super light. You want to have somewhere between 1,000 and 1,400 pounds. 1,400 pounds is a large animal. You're also a little bit later in the development process. They can be up to 36 months old, typically. Well, you've got more bone there too. So your rib bones are bigger, your spine is a little heavier, your long bones are a little heavier, even the ones that are on the carcass. So you're paying for a little bit of bone density there. When you purchase that carcass, yep, you're still purchasing some of your bone that you're not going to use, particularly the backbone. There's not much that goes in there. There's a few steaks that are taken off that, but not that much. Your shanks, you're not eating the bone. The bone is in there, but you're not going to eat it. So figure that 60% of a 1,000-pound animal is you've got a 600-pound carcass hanging on the rail. That's typically what people pay for. And you can pay for that a couple different ways. For us, we will give people the option. They want to have their own butcher. They can have their own butcher. We will deliver their animal within about a 100-mile radius. Anything more, we'll tack on a little extra for whatever the mileage is, because I don't want to take this thing to Albuquerque, but choosing that butcher is important. And if you use the ones we use, trust them. One of the things when you're looking at a butcher, right now you're about a year out. They are so full because people are doing exactly the same thing. They are purchasing locally, and we, good God, greatly appreciate that. Everybody does. You're not purchasing from us. I'm glad that you're purchasing locally from other people. Mm-hmm. Making that connection, helping yourself out, helping them out, and then you're making your own economy right here with a butcher shop. Now, kind of a sideline. How do you put or how do you fix yourself onto a certain butcher? Well, word of mouth is one thing, which is important. The other thing is some butchers will also purchase animals and have them for sale, and some of them are strictly by custom cut. That's all they do. They don't do anything but just cut your animal. The best thing to do is visit them. And you walk in, you can smell the difference between a clean facility, and a clean facility will still have a odor of processing meat. That's normal. I've heard of some that, they have kind of a manure smell. I'd stay away from that. Let you educate yourself on what is a clean and what should a clean butcher smell like. I want my stuff clean. First thing, I don't care anything else. I want them clean. I want that hygienic.
In my few experiences going to butchers, I think the ones that I knew were clean, they had that it's like a cleaning supply odor to an extent. But it you just understand, like, it is clean. The ones that are more, that it's probably not the best place is when you can, like, there's like a tanginess. I like, that's the best way I can describe it, is there's just like almost like it's just not quite right, almost like you're smelling like tangy salsa or something like that. That's how I've always kind of smelled it. I'm like, oh, that's not good, because it's almost what it is it's like rotting meat, really.
Right, and there is an odor to all of them. If you ever, and I have helped cut meat, I've a little bit. Different pieces of meat taste and smell differently. For instance, the fat around a brisket and brisket meat does not taste or smell like ribeye or rib meat. I mean, it has a different smell. So you're going to pick some of those odors up. That doesn't mean that they're not clean. I mean, you ask to look at their back room, and sometimes they don't want people in there because they don't want a bunch of people traipsing through in their cut area, and I don't blame them. I mean, that's and I'm sure there's probably some health, USDA, and there's some of their inspection stuff that probably limits some of that, which is good. But ask them what they do. I mean, a good reputable butcher will be, hey, this is what we do. You're gonna smell meat. You're gonna smell bone, and you're gonna smell that stuff there, and even the discard, the fat, you'll smell that. That is normal. And it's when you are smelling manure or rotting flesh, like you say, I'd kind of stay away from that. Or maybe there's a reason why. Maybe we're getting something from their waste outside of the building that hasn't been picked up. That's a consideration. Be fair, be honest about it. But cleanliness is my very first thing. I want to make sure that they're clean. And the other part is, how do they wrap their product? A lot of people are going to vacuum seal, which is very heavy plastic. Boy, that stuff, I found a piece of a steak, believe it or not, it was 10 years old in the bottom of the freezer. Somehow it slipped away, found its way, dove down to the bottom corner. And I looked at that and went, wow, 10 years it sat in this freezer, and opened it up, and it was perfect with a really good vacuum seal. Now, it doesn't mean that you always have to have vacuum seal. It provides very good protection, and there's no doubt. You can ship it probably better that way too. It's not going to get any holes poked into it. But another butcher we use wraps with the plastic wrap inside of typical butcher paper. And you know what? They're good. It does a very fine job. But that wrapping is important. You don't want people just, putting just paper on it. Yeah, that's going to be short lived. A lot of your burgers anymore are in a little casing in a tube from a butcher. It's very quick and efficient for them, and that's a very good way to preserve that hamburger with no air, so it doesn't freeze or burn. So choosing your butcher is important. If you choose your own butcher, you're going to be probably paying them directly for their service, which they're all a little bit different. We've got a butcher that we use, and we will basically pay for that. We will do the animal and processing all as one type of a bundled cost. And when you do that, you don't know what the cost is, but they typically pay them to harvest the animal, and a disposal fee for all of the entrails. All that's about $90. And at this time right now, they're charging 80 cents a pound to process, cut, wrap, freeze, and have it ready for delivery. They don't mess around with, well, this cut is going to be so much if you want to have it, some of your round steaks, if you want those into cube steaks because they're more tender, then we charge a little extra for that. They don't do that. They just do a flat fee, which I really like. It seems a little higher, but it's overall, again, it's an even cost. They just do their thing. It's easy for them to figure, easy for you to figure, and you still get a custom cut. You get to choose what you want to have as far as your steaks and how much, all of that. So,
well, and even at 80 cents a pound, and you have a 600-pound animal, you're still only going to be spending about $500 for the whole year, potentially, for an entire animal. So if you have a family that goes through an entire beef for that year, you've spent only $500. And if you go to the store and you end up buying a $300 prime rib for the year, you just bought half of your animal right there. So why not get what you want, do it the way you want it, and have it from somebody who, you can trust to do that.
Yeah. Now, and when you think of it that way, a 300-pound roast that lasts for one meal versus the entire cut, and it's going to be a little over that. What a 600-pound carcass weight times 80 cents is $480 plus your $90 for all of the other service to get it to that carcass. You're looking at 570.
Right.
So but that's everything. That's including the wrapping.
You also still have burgers. Like that's the thing people forget, I'm just going to put together tacos for tonight. I'm going to come home, or I'm going to put together spaghetti or something. All the burger that you have throughout the year, you're getting with that. You've got steaks on a regular basis all year long. You have whatever you want. And we can start talking about that here pretty soon, is where are all of these different cuts coming from? And we'll throw a graphic up that we've shown before.
Well, and when you have that choice of what you want, you can choose exactly what you want over the counter at a butcher or storefront. But again, you're going backwards in your cost effectiveness. And if you want nothing but burger, you can do that. You can do that very, very efficiently. Your burger is going to probably cost a little bit more because it's the same cost to do your burger as it is to do your steaks. So I like to know where my beef is coming from. I like to know how it's handled. I like to know that we haven't put any hormones in it, nothing like that. And it's healthy. I don't know, maybe it's in my head, but it just tastes healthier when I know where it's come from, and there's a lot of people that say the same thing. They say, we know what your beef is like. That's why we want it. So um, that's a good thing. That's some trust there with your customers. Um, Along with your cuts, and it's funny when you put the graphic up for where the different pieces of meat come from, you may look at that and you may look at, I think the one you're using probably doesn't have anything like tomahawk steak. What the heck is a tomahawk steak?
Yeah, we
And
discussed this before. I think it normally comes from like the rib area, right?
yeah, it's basically your rib and ribeye, only with they're not cutting the rib off to make your short ribs, which is also, everybody likes a rack of ribs.
Yeah.
And so they're leaving a long rib on there. It's marketing. I think the other thing that you probably don't show on there is like a flat iron steak.
Right.
And a flat iron steak comes from the front and that chuck, that shoulder. And there's a piece of muscle in there, a layer that is kind of flat, and actually it's very tender, but it is cut into steaks. You probably don't have that on your graphic. So there's a lot of different type of meats or names of meats that are either the same as another cut or slightly different that they've taken out for, your marketing, like your porterhouses up there around your ribs and stuff too, right?
Yeah, and I love this graphic, frankly, because we took this picture when we were actually visiting our friends at Dunroven this summer, and it was on the steakhouse that we went to. It was on their menu, and I showed that to you, and you're like, hey, that's a good one. So we just took a picture of it. It does show the various cooking levels that we discussed already, the rare all the way to well cooked steaks. But what's important too is if anybody's looking at this graphic, it says the various cuts on it, pork or a pot roast, short ribs, so on and so forth. And then you go all the way down and it shows ground. Ground is that ground beef that we've talked about. Now, again, everything can be made into ground beef. That's not the point. That's just normally where the most, the way to think about it is the most wasted steak is, so that you're getting scraps. So what you can't really use as a normal steak that we think of, you get scraps of it, and then you put it in the grinder with a little bit of fat, and that's how you get your ground beef. But then the other thing too is
what a waste of a ribeye, though.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But then you can pull the meat from between the ribs as well, and that each little slice of meat, that's like a scrap, you just throw that in there, and that's how you can maximize the use of all the meat that's on that carcass without really getting rid of it, because you're not going to make a steak out of the small bits of meat that are between the ribs, but you can use that for ground beef. So yeah, I love this graphic.
Or you just have that as your ribs. I mean, there's a lot, you got short ribs.
Yeah, but I love this graphic. I think it's really helpful if anybody needs it for, and we'll keep it up here for a long time, but if anybody ever needs this as a kind of where am I looking for this particular steak, so on and so forth, it's great. The other thing too, the thing that this does not show is where you get your tenderloins. It shows where the short loin is and the sirloin, but those are, also considered, if you're talking with like wild game, your back straps, that's where your tenderloins are, and that's up there towards the region of the short loin and the sirloin, and it goes along the sides of the lumbar system on their spine.
On the inside, yeah,
right.
On the inside of the carcass, not on the top of the carcass. So, that clinic we were teaching at was funny. We all went out to a big steakhouse, and there was one gal, and it was like, man, she was just hugging close to us when we were getting ready to be seated, and she goes, "I want to sit by you." Oh, okay. I'm thinking, what the heck? And she goes, "I want to know what ranchers choose when they go to a restaurant." I said, well, that's easy, And she goes,
believe it or not, steak and shrimp is like my go-to. Some sort of steak with shrimp. That's what I do.
And she said, what cut of steak and why? I mean, she was asking all kinds of really good, intelligent questions. She goes, I hear so much about like sirloin or a New York strip, because it's in the name. I go, yeah, I'd take a rib any day, ribeye, rib steak, bone in or boneless, doesn't matter. If it's a ribeye, it's boneless typically, and that's what I want. She goes, "Oh, I hear so much about T-bones too." I go, "Yeah, T-bone's okay. It's a good steak, but it's a little further towards the front of that or that animal. I'd rather have that. I'd rather have the rib, that prime. That's where your most marbling is." And she was asking great questions, and pretty soon everybody's listening to the same thing. It's like they just don't know. They just they're shooting in the dark. And I think it's, in a way, people can educate themselves quite easily now with the internet and YouTube and you name it. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff on. There's some poor stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff too. Like anything else, buyer beware. But
Well, I mean, that's why we're doing this too. We
right,
want to share these things. I'll have in the description, but it explains, the cost, the grain and grass finish, so people can look and figure out exactly what are all these things, what are the different steak cuts. They can see that graphic that we just put up, so that they can always go back and go, oh yeah, let's take a look. What do we really want? And again, like, answer your thing, the ribs are good and everything. I personally like the tenderloin area because it me being who I am and how much I work out and try to stay as healthy as possible, it's less fat, but then there's still a lot of flavor there. And that's my personal preference. But yeah, if I can get any sort of tenderloin or sirloin or something like that, I'm all about it.
yeah. To me, it seems like the further back you will go along that animal, from the front you got your chuck
And the
and those kinds
brisket.
of cuts, and those are really fatty. And there's a lot of fat interspersed with those. But the further you move back along that animal, and you get to like your round steaks on your rump, those are very lean, or much more leaner than the rest.
Yeah.
And so, big round steak is not something I desire. So I will have that made into cube steaks, which is typically what you would make a chicken fried steak
Bob's.
from.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, or no, I'd run that through there. Um, and even kebabs, I don't really do that. I would grab a decent steak,
Sirloin.
like even a or a
Yeah, Chuck.
chuck steak, and make your kebabs out of it, because round steak is it's reasonably tough, and I don't want to be having to gnaw on a kebab. I want that thing to be nice and tender. So I will make my kebabs. I'll sacrifice a steak to make kebabs out of that. A good steak, a decent steak. I'm not going to make a rib steak out of it. I mean, that's that's for just a plate eating. But so looking at your different types, know what kind of meat you want. Now, when you start to get to your cut order with a butcher, they'll say, "How do you want this cut up?" You can cut it up, and they have a form generally that they keep on file. You can change it anytime. That cut and how you cut depends on the kind of yield you're going to get off this animal. Now, you're going to get a lot of people, and this has been debated a little bit. I've talked to several butchers about it, and depending on what you are reading or who's putting that out, will tell you what your yield should be. And then I've watched how stuff was cut. So you take that carcass and you cut that into meat, into different steaks, burger, roasts, whatever you want. And you'll see a lot of information say a 40% yield from the live weight. And okay, well, how much is that from your carcass weight? That's kind of a little bit more,
Accurate.
manageable
Yeah.
and a little more accurate. And if you can get, to me, and most of it's based off their live weight. So they'll say you should be able to get 40% of, packaged meat off of your live weight. And that's been tough to achieve. It can be done, but here's how it's done. And that is where not a lot of trim is taken off. A lot of the waste fat is packaged. Some of your bone, a lot of your bone is packaged. Those are things that you're going to be cutting off anyway or eating around. The one butcher that we use primarily, they tend to trim the fat instead of leaving like 3/4 of an inch of fat around everything. They'll take that down to a 1/4 inch of fat. Well, you place that much off of your roasts and steaks, all down to a 1/4 inch, which still leaves a protective layer and still gives you some flavor when you cook. You're taking all of that away, so your yield is going down on your packaged meat. However, think about it, you're not going to use that anyway,
Right.
and you'll be down there around that 32% of the live weight yield. But what's really come in closer, and an easier way to fix that, or kind of target in what you're really going to get, is I like to figure 60%, as I said before, my rail weight or carcass weight is going to be of the live weight. And then if I figure 50% packaged of my rail weight, it's going to put you pretty close. You may get more than that because they've left more bone in or more fat. And I've seen people take the T-bones, for instance, cut that, and there's a tag end of fat that's, almost a couple inches in square, and they'll leave that on there. Well, you do that builds up over time. You can easily, include another 50 to 70 pounds of meat or of yield by not cutting off those tag ends or leaving bone in. So the more bone in you have reduces your freezer space. Yes, seems like you're going to get more meat per pound, but are you really getting the meat? You're getting fat or bone maybe. So if you want to make yourself feel good about it, leave the bone in, but really be realistic about it. And the butcher we've talked to and used, as of late, we're very upfront about that. She says, oh yeah, this is how we figured that. And they even have some literature on that. It says 40% is pretty ambitious. And that's how they're doing it. Now, if you take one product, your mom likes to have about 93% lean on the burger.
Right. 90, and that means 93% beef with 7% fat in the burger.
Right. And you can cut that down. You can still hold a burger together on a grill with that. And that's what the suet does. The fat holds a burger together so it doesn't crumble apart. She can put those or hand them to me, and I put them on a grill or I make them, and they'll hold together. They're lean with not a lot of juice. You're not having a lot of flare up because you're burning all this fat off in the grill, and have a good burger. You can also take that to a skillet and break that apart and make taco meat. And there's very little to drain off of that. There's not a lot of fat in there. There's some, a little bit, but not a lot, but it still gives good flavor. So she likes that. She's targeted that 93% lean or 7% fat. Typically, a lot of burger is done at 80-20, 20% fat to 80% lean. And if you figure that out, on roughly half of your animal is going to be burger. If you're not saving a lot of cube steaks, you're making a lot of your lesser tender cuts like your round steaks. If you're just putting those into burger instead of a lot of cube steak, you're going to get more bulk burger. And your burger is your catch-all for all your waste. Right. It's not waste. It's just stuff that you can't, like you said, you can't make steaks out of in between the ribs. Yeah, it's scraps, but it all adds up. So almost half of our animals are burger. Burger is like the flour of the baking world, right? Yeah. I mean, for meat, it's a staple. You can do so much with a burger. But when you took the difference between 7% burger and 20% burger on an animal that's roughly 1,000 pounds, you're talking about 25 pounds difference. North of that, and if you're really conservative, you're calling it 23, 24 pounds of fat. That is a significant amount. That's almost 3/4 or 1/3 of the way towards your 30 to 40% yield, and just your burger alone.
Yeah.
So, don't fool yourself that I should get 40%. It depends on what your cuts are. So
the other thing too that I think needs to be explained as well is, we talk about prime rib because it's such a delicacy for those who really enjoy beef. And for us, normally that's what we do during the holidays is we do a prime rib for typically Christmas. That prime rib though is other cuts. So if you look at that graphic, I'll try and put that graphic up a second time real quick so that people can see that. That cut, if you ask for a prime rib, you need to ask that up front, because what they will do is they will end up not having prime rib cut, or they won't have other steaks cut, like the sirloins and stuff like that, because it goes along that back area. So if you want a prime rib, you have to say that up front. Otherwise, if you make it an afterthought, that prime rib will have already been cut up to different steaks, and that no longer exists. So there's things like that think ahead when you're customizing that order. Okay, I want 3/4 inch cuts, blah 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 blah. Oh, also I want a prime rib, so please cut the prime rib first and then finish it out with whatever's left.
Well, and that brings up a couple of points there. You can't have a prime rib roast or two very large prime rib roasts and the same equal amount of rib steaks off of an animal.
Right.
it's either or. You either get the roast or you get the steak.
Right.
There, you can't make them grow extra ribs on those things. So know what your cuts are, know what you want. Now, another good thing to do is to understand, do I want my steak 3/4 of an inch thick, which is pretty thin? That's you could easily, dry those out or overcook them because they're thin, but you're going to get more steaks off your animal. If you have your steak at about 1.25 inches thick, really nice thickness. Some people do 1.5 inches. Some people do almost 2 inch thick steaks. You're not going to get a lot of steaks out there. You're going to get very large, thick, heavy steaks, which to me is almost too much. Not much bang for your buck, but you're going to end up with less of thicker steaks. I mean, it's just thinking about how many pieces can I cut this into and still make it a good steak. I like ours at least 1.25 inches. Still provides a really good thick steak. Now, one thing I want to talk about a little bit here, and maybe should have talked about this at the beginning with our grass fat versus grain fat. What animal? Do you want a steer? Do you want a heifer? Or do you want a virgin bull? And this last one that we did, we had when we calved, we had a little bull that his testicles weren't there. I mean, he had nothing. There's a little scrotum, but nothing there. I couldn't band him. And so that, well, we'll wait till branding time, and
Which means he had. So if anybody's not quite sure what that meant, he had 2 testicles within his body that were undescended. So he had testosterone like a normal bull that had never been castrated. However, you couldn't access those testicles. So therefore he was still a bull, but it's just the way it was. So he took advantage of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so, at branding time, they still hadn't descended. So I don't, okay, all right, we can't cut anything out of it. I'm not going to open up an animal and do surgery on him. That's crazy. So we just let him develop and kept him away from any cows. And then we butchered him at 18 months. And that's what we're eating now. So if you're looking for a grass-fed, low-fat animal, that virgin bull is your biggest bang for your buck. Super lean because they got a lot of fast muscle development with very little
because of the testosterone.
Right. And so, but what I went ahead and did is I went ahead and stuck about 1,200 pounds of grain through him and fattened him up. And so we've got they look like the choice steaks off of him. And so we got really good marbling, great taste, and he's tender. We had roast that you could cut with a fork. So that's pretty good. Yeah. So you got that choice, but you want to make sure it's a virgin bull. You don't want him to breed.
The problem is, if anybody's wondering why, it's because once they start breeding, the hormones go through their body and it changes the flavor of the meat, just like you would if you're familiar with hunting at all. We keep saying this, but it's very similar. Hunting, you've got bucks and bulls. When you start eating them compared to a doe or a cow, elk, they don't taste as good because the testosterone flowing. Yeah, it really kind of messes the flavor up.
Yeah, it's a very strong taste. A lot of your burger are some of your less desirable animals that they're bulls, they're older cows, things like that you eat at a grocery. Still good, but they're mixed up and utilized in that manner. So your bull is really good for that. And we've got another one this year. We've got one testicle and one's not descended, and I will have him available as a grass fed. And actually, I think we're going to probably keep him and butcher him ourselves, but really good chunk of meat at about 18 months old. And we don't let our bulls or our steers get very old so they don't get that big, heavy bone density. So you're talking about the heaviest we're going to get on these is about 1,200 pounds. We're not going to get up to that 1,400 pounds of the stuff we're doing because we're mostly grain or grass fed. And then we go ahead and they're a grain finish. They are finished that way, but that's what we're after. What we'll also do is take our heifer that is 2 years old and breed her at 2 so that she calves at 3. But if she is open or not pregnant, then we will hold her through the winter and then fatten her in the spring, because some people want spring butcher, not necessarily a fall butcher. So we will have her, she'll be on hay all winter and what grass that they can graze. But then I will bring her in and have her close where she can graze, but then also finish her with a grain finish. Heifers tend to get the fat content faster. They develop fat quicker than the bulls do or the steers do. So you can get a quite good piece of meat from a heifer that is very well marbled, and then have a good piece of meat that way. And then typically steers are steers. You know, that's what most everybody thinks of. But there are other animals to consider and to know, okay, what am I going to get produced out of this? Am I going to have a really lean animal like a grass-fed bull is going to be about as lean as you're going to get, or am I going to get myself a heavily fed for, like you mentioned earlier, up to 180 days, which to me is too long. It's just
Right.
that's an awful rich piece of meat. I just can't do it.
It's getting back to the feedlots though, that, you know, they have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
People like us, they're probably going to be closer to that 45 to 90 day mark, realistically. 90 days.
90 is a very popular.
Yeah. 90s out there. It's not 90 to 120 tends to be the most popular from people I've discussed, but once you're getting towards that 4-month mark, it's getting a little expensive and they're using up space. So there's a lot of ranchers that kind of float towards that 90-day mark.
Yeah, and I want that fat to be converted. And I did discover, which with our recipe and what we're doing, that I can make a 40, I think we did 42 days.
Yeah.
Using the same amount of grain that you would do on a 60-day. You still want that 57-day turnover of fat and the marbling. It takes time to do that. You still got to feed them, and they've got to metabolize in order to place that fat in there with that excess carbohydrate that they're getting. But you can do that, but there's some other things to watch that you have to be very vigilant about, watching these animals and making sure that they stay healthy. They don't develop some kind of a ailment called acidosis, where they can't break down the carbos in their body. And so you have to watch for that, be careful. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people, especially the larger feedlots, where they can't watch every animal quite as close as you can with a small operation, you know, they back that off their rations a little bit, and then they have to go longer in order to achieve what they need to for the fat content. But I can't think of much else. You know, these are all 30,000 foot view type, you know, the discussion that we're having over a number of these topics covering that. But still, you're going to get a lot more meat, usable meat. The fact is, you're going to get some cuts that you didn't know that you could get, like tongue, oxtail. You can make some oxtail soup, you know, stew meat. You know, the heart, liver, if you want to eat liver, you can have that. Those are all available too, which will take your yield up as well, because a liver and a heart are, you know, they're fairly heavy. So things to also consider, that you're going to eat some of the entrails. That's going to bring your yield up. Other than that, still, it's much better for you to personally know where your meat's from, I think. If you trust, you know, Brazilian meat or Mexican meat or Australian meat, that's okay. Yeah, you know, we've discussed a little bit of that too, but taking care of some of the people that are right in your backyard that are trying to make a living doing this, and they can make a little bit more. And trust me, they're not going to gouge you. If they do, they're not going to be in business very long.
Right.
And you're certainly going to pay less than you would at a packer. But, you know, say this 1,000-pound animal doing what we're doing, what we provide, a full animal, cut and wrapped, you're looking at about somewhere in the neighborhood, $2,500 for an entire animal. And take that, all of those cuts that you would want, and put a retail price of those over your butcher's through your showcase counter, and see what that price would be. And I'll bet you you're going to be double that or more at this point where we're at in 2022.
Yeah. Well, that's our guide for how to find steaks, how to get the right cuts, how to ask for certain things, and what your process is. Again, like Dad said, you know, it's buying local. You know, you're helping that local farmer or rancher. You're helping create jobs with those butchers, helping get those guys money in their pockets too. And then of course, you know where the product's coming from. You're saving money on the back end anyway. And honestly, it's just, I think it's an overall better thing. So buy local, find somebody nearby, and get a hold of that beef.
And by no means is this a very comprehensive discussion that we've had. It's a big overview, but it's some things to consider and dig into for yourself. And then when you do that, or until you do that, we thank you till you're better paid.